The world has been a constant tussle between the conquerors and the vanquished. Sometimes the conquest has been driven by a pure strategic land acquisition. Sometimes it's been plain economics. And sometimes it has been just to support an ally, which has often led to an escalation, resulting in massive wars. Welcome to the 75th episode of the Why in History. I am Ajay Kaur, and today we look back at the 74 previous episodes and try to create patterns and lessons learned from world history. Can a small nation with a powerful neighbor operate and survive independently? The Russia-Ukraine conflict would indicate that it's a firm no. But what about Ukraine itself? What a humongous blunder to give up its nuclear arsenal, which had made it the number 3 biggest nuclear power in the world. Never give up your strategic advantage. But under pressure from the West and Russia, Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal, hoping for some financial gain so it could give a boost to its economy. And Ukraine did have second thoughts as the day for renunciation of its nuclear weapons grew closer, and it asked for security guarantees from the United States, United Kingdom, and Russia. And that is exactly what was signed in the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, a security guarantee for Ukraine from the US, UK, and Russia in exchange for its nuclear arsenal. Yes, a guarantee of security from the US, UK, and Russia. But then, accords are accords and last only the lifetime of their signatories in power. The United States of America, the Russian Federation, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and North Ireland reaffirmed their commitment to Ukraine in accordance with the principles of the CSCE, that is the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, to respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine. This is the text of the first confirmation paragraph from the Budapest Memorandum of 1994. The Russian signature on the accord was from President Boris Yeltsin, while as the American signature came from Bill Clinton. None of the two are currently in office. Accords can best be looked upon as PR stunts to portray a positive image of their signatories, and they die as soon as their signatories leave office. So it was complete folly on the part of Ukraine to rely on an accord as the security guarantee after giving up its nuclear stockpile. But could Ukraine have adopted a more neutral stance and taken a page out of the book of Yugoslavia's Joseph Tito? Tito held Yugoslavia together at the peak of the Cold War when Russia was governed by Joseph Stalin and refused to become a Soviet satellite state. But at the same time, he also kept the West at bay, not bowing too much to their demands. And because of that, the Soviets were convinced that Tito did not pose a threat to their security. So they too left Yugoslavia alone. But what a huge miscalculation from Russia. Wars are usually started by the aggressors with the conviction that victory will be achieved in a matter of days. And that's exactly what Putin felt would happen the moment the Russian forces landed within Ukraine's territory. And that is also exactly what Saddam Hussein felt would happen when he invaded Iran in September 1980. And that is also exactly what North Korea's Kim Il-sung felt would happen when he invaded South Korea in June of 1950. Entering a war while grossly underestimating the opposition and projecting the best case scenario is the perfect recipe for a disaster. When wars extend beyond the first few weeks, the probability of a stalemate increases drastically. And as the possibility of a stalemate becomes more and more obvious, both sides start getting more desperate, and the biggest casualty are the Geneva Protocol norms. During the Iran-Iraq War, it was the use of nerve agents like sarin and mustard gas. In the Korean War, there were 4 million casualties over a period of 3 years, and half of these were civilian. Intense bombing by the US Air Force over North Korea resulted in the casualty count being twice that of South Korea. About 32,000 tons of incendiary bombs like napalm were dropped over North Korea. And the worst part of all of this is that the war would have never happened if two superpowers after World War II had not gone on an ego trip and divided a peninsula so each of them could control some of the territory. Talking of ego trips, what about the 1948 Berlin blockade, when suddenly 2.5 million German civilians had no access to food, medicine, fuel, electricity, and other basic goods? Why? Because Stalin's ego was hurt that the Western powers had started giving economic aid to Germany post-World War II. So to limit the ability of the US, Britain, and France to travel to their respective sectors within the city of Berlin, Stalin blocked all rail, road, and canal access to the western zone of Berlin. And how was he able to do that? Because the city of Berlin was right in the middle of the Soviet-controlled East Germany, and Berlin itself had been divided into 4 sectors, each managed by US, Great Britain, France, and Soviet Union. And how was the problem solved? Not by starting a war, but through sheer ingenuity displayed by the United States, which made the rest of the world acknowledge the US as the new leader of the modern world. Exploiting a loophole in its written agreements with the Soviet Union from 1945, which gave the US and its allies control of the 3 20-mile wide air corridors into West Berlin, the US and British planes carried out the largest air relief operation in history, transporting more than 2.3 million tons of supplies into West Berlin on more than 270,000 flights over a period of 11 months till the blockade ended. Handing a strategically significant and demoralizing defeat to the aggressor, not through guns and bullets, but sheer brilliance and ingenuity. Leadership is all about driving the consensus towards solving a problem. And the next time the US displayed leadership at the global level was under Dwight Eisenhower during the Suez Canal crisis of 1956. This time, the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev went on an ego trip and threatened to nuke Western Europe if the Israeli, French, and the British forces did not withdraw from the conflict zone. President Dwight Eisenhower immediately responded, first cautioning Nikita Khrushchev from intervening in the conflict, and at the same time issuing a stern warning to the 3 US allies in the conflict, the Israelis, the French, and the British. The 3 of them were asked to suspend the conflict or face economic sanctions. Yes, unbelievable in the current era, but 3 US allies who had triggered a global conflict were asked to withdraw immediately or face economic sanctions. And once again, the United States established itself as the leader of the modern world. And that leads us to the question, how much influence and impact do leaders really have on their respective countries and the world in general? And the answer is a resounding yes. Leaders indeed can make or break the growth and wellness of a nation and the entire world in general. The examples of Harry Truman in the Berlin blockade and Dwight Eisenhower in the Suez Canal crisis show clearly the influence that the leaders had in diffusing the crisis and maintaining global order. Leaders can make or break a nation. And when it comes to break, there's no better example than Adolf Hitler. In the early 20th century, Germany was the center of engineering and scientific excellence. Between 1901 and 1910, Germany led the pack with 15 Nobel Prizes. The US just had 2, and one of them was for peace. By 1932, before Adolf Hitler became Chancellor, Germany still led the pack with 33 Nobel Prizes. The US had 13. But one deranged individual would change the course of history for Germany. As he pushed his agenda to get rid of several ethnic groups within Germany, these groups migrated to the United States. And a lot of them were prominent members of the engineering and the scientific community. Germany's loss was USA's gain. By 1954, less than 10 years after World War II, the US surged ahead of the pack with 44 Nobel Prizes. As of early 2024, the US still leads the pack with 413 Nobel Prizes, with Germany being a distant third with 115. Germany would have ended up a starving agrarian economy post-World War II had it not been for the Marshall Plan proposed by US Secretary of State George Marshall in 1947 that initiated economic assistance to restore the economic infrastructure of post-war Europe, including Germany. In China, in 1978, the authoritarian Mao Zedong passed, and a new visionary leader, Deng Xiaoping, took the reins. But Deng Xiaoping did not bulldoze his vision through the country. He made the Chinese first see what they were missing to make sure they were all focused and behind him in execution of that vision. Working with US President Jimmy Carter, Deng Xiaoping ensured that as he converted China into an industrial economy, he had all the infrastructure to do so, including trained manpower. And that meant a sleeping agrarian giant was suddenly woken up to line up to receive higher education. A country where schools had been shut for more than a decade suddenly saw its entire population, irrespective of their age, line up to write exams to gain admission into the universities. One leader having an impact that echoed through several decades. And talking about long-term impact, how can one forget FDR and his effort towards making the US dollar the global currency? Within the matter of 4 years, the United States lost its military advantage over the rest of the world when the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb in August of 1949. But it was the dollarization of the world economy that gave United States the advantage over the rest of the globe financially, economically, and strategically. And to this date, a threat of economic sanctions has been an effective tool in maintaining global world order. But the envelope may have been pushed a little bit too far, and that is the reason the emerging economies have begun to look for alternates to the US dollar. The world is turning multipolar, and several regional groups of nations are trying hard to get around the risk of economic sanctions. Prominent among this group is the BRICS group of nations led by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And with the pace with which it is growing, Saudi Arabia most likely will be the S in BRICS very soon. Brazil and Russia have pushed the BRICS Charter to look for an alternative trade currency to the US dollar. But the only currency which has given some element of competition to the US dollar is the Chinese yuan, but that too is very restricted to China's cross-border trade. So a serious threat to the US dollar from a foreign currency is still far off. But the world is turning multipolar. And more emerging economies are trying to band together and stand up to the developed world. Which brings us to the most burning question. Do humans respect and value other humans? The world has progressed by leaps and bounds thanks to advances in technology. Advances which led to the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century. Advances which led to naval expeditions across the globe. But for some reason, the industrialists and the entrepreneurs did not appreciate the value of human resources. Human capital was super critical to the profitability of global enterprise. But unfortunately, it gave rise to the abhorrent practice of slavery. Capitalists wanted to get labor for free. And if that was not enough, the labor was forced into the trade and provide its services for free. Now, the West gets a lot of flack for promoting the practice of slavery to benefit their enterprise. But we often forget that there was a huge supply side to slavery. Without a steady supply, slavery would not have flourished for too long and would have actually ensured that the capitalists invested to some extent into their human resources. But because the supply was unlimited, there was no incentive to even invest in the basic human needs like care and feed. So the primary suppliers within Africa, like Senegal, Gambia, Congo, were equal participants in the promotion of the abhorrent practice of slavery. Besides slavery, the other abhorrent practice during the industrial era, and which exists even today to some extent, was the practice of child labor. Once again, the quest to get labor for free or at the bare minimum price. It took about 50 years for the first regulation to pass in England that aimed at improving the working conditions of children in factories. Yes, improve the working conditions for children in factories, not ban child labor. Slavery took a lot longer to be abolished. So it almost seems like by default, industrialists and entrepreneurs look for ways to avoid investing in human capital. And regulation, unfortunately, is always a few decades behind. And continuing on the topic of valuing fellow humans, what about the centuries of struggle that women have had to go through to obtain the same level of rights as men? From the right to vote to easy access to birth control, the struggle has been long and tedious. And there still is a wide gap when it comes to gender equality. And it is on that note that we end this section of the program. On to the quiz section. Question from the previous episode. What movie did the Panama firm Mossack Fonseca try to block from releasing on Netflix since it was inspired by the Panama Papers? In 2019, Mossack and Fonseca launched a legal suit that attempted to block the release of The Laundromat, a Netflix film inspired by the Panama Papers, arguing that their depiction by Gary Oldman and Antonio Banderas was defamatory. So the answer is D, The Laundromat, starring Gary Oldman and Antonio Banderas. Question for the current episode. Which countries are the top 3 holders of gold reserves in the world today? Mind you, I'm asking gold reserves, not total foreign exchange reserves. So, which countries are the top three holders of gold reserves in the world today? Is it A, US, Germany, and Italy? B, US, India, and China? C, India, US, Russia? Or D, Japan, US, Germany? Once again, which countries are the top three holders of gold reserves in the world today? Are these A, the US, Germany, Italy? B, the US, India, China? C, India, the US, Russia? Or D, Japan, the US, Germany? The answer will be provided in the next episode. That's all we have in the current episode. In the next episode, we'll take a look at governmental overthrows that were influenced by banks and the financial institutions. Yes, that has happened. So it is going to be an interesting podcast episode. Till then, stay safe and keep exploring the why in history.